Ladies and
Um,
gentlemen, changing the mood, Mr. Ross.
Thank you, sir. So I offered to talk about the current topic here, and I will have some visuals, and here they are. I offered to talk about this because in some recent sessions, we were talking about markets and marketing and, understanding what's going on and getting, adoption driven with customers. And that happens to be my old life. I'm currently at Basal Systems, where we are providing the regulatory and quality and clinical data to industry. So we have a platform, makes it fast and easy to find any applications, regulatory applications, FDA mod, quality data, Australia, Canada, all that good stuff. We have a thriving, small little software business. But I wanted to share this with the group because everybody's very active in medtech, and what I used to do in my past life is still very relevant. The company that acquired my consulting company, it was called Navigant at the time. It's not called Guidehouse. They still do this work. There's still a team. It's some of my old team. My right-hand guy is still running this part of their practice, based here in Minneapolis. And so this goes on. It was started inside of Medtronic. You can see a couple terms there. We have literally inside of Medtronic and out trained thousands of medtech marketing people and strategy people, probably more than 5,000 or 7,000, probably more than that, on what they call patient access acceleration, how to get patients cared for that need the appropriate care. We called it, when we left Medtronic and created a new version, we called it the science of market development. So if you hear those terms, that's where it came from. We developed these initial concepts back in 2001 and 2002, and then left Medtronic in 2007 to build a consulting firm around it. So I've got a few visuals. I'm going to go that they help with understanding some of these key concepts. And I still lecture on this fairly often at some local universities and things. But I'm going to run through. I think you guys will just find this fascinating about how to think about the adoption of medical devices. So to start with, right, we're all used to working in our space and competing against our competitors. And it often, what we learned was the default was, while we're trying to figure out how to fight for market share, and of course we want to grow. And so one was kind of active, driving market share, and one was more passive about, well, how do we help the market grow? And the whole point of market development, especially for new technologies, if you're coming out of the gate, is you got to drive that initial market growth. So we would use an example like this and say, fine, here's your market, and you're going to fight for 1% market share growth or whatever it is. But if that market is in the context of a much larger opportunity, forget the market share, go after the market growth, because market share fights back. Somebody else is going to try to take it back. Market growth is an annuity. So that's the context for why this is so very important, again, especially for new technologies. Now, a bunch of words on this slide, but this is basically, you can screen snap this, but this is how market development is different from classic marketing, right? You're not worried about market share and competitive positioning and all that product planning and pricing and things like that. You're worried about total market definition, total penetration, the things that the market needs to use your technology, not just yours, but any competing ones as well. So that's reimbursement and clinical evidence, all that stuff. So that's the focus of market development, especially, again, often applied for new technologies coming to market, as many of us are dealing with it. So we all know the S-shaped adoption curve. This is the basis. This is the beginning and the end game of market development. What kind of curve are you going to experience and why? This is what the VCs want to know. This is what the corporate investors want to know. Why should we believe this story? And how can you influence this curve to happen faster and be at a higher slope? And it turns out that there's a lot that you can do and a lot you can understand to predict this curve. The challenge, of course, is that these curves end up, in reality, in hindsight, to be all over the place. And I often use a fun example like this to just look at, this is from the New York Times from years ago, all of these, home technologies. And I call out, they're very different curves. And I call out three very similar ones. If you look at the refrigerator, right? It looks like a really classic S-shaped adoption curve. It looks like it went fast, but in reality, it's 30 years before everybody gets a refrigerator that helps them save food, helps them live better. That's a pretty big value proposition. And you think, oh, home appliances, people like it. They like home appliances that make life easier. Think about this one. The dishwasher, it's the same buyer in the same setting. It's all of the same characteristics, and yet the dishwasher, which makes life a lot easier, has a completely different adoption curve. And then you think, okay, well, they got all the appliances they need. They already have a stove. They already have an oven. They sure as hell don't need another way to heat up food, right? And yet the microwave comes in, a third way to cook food, and it takes off. So clearly, the core value proposition of the technology itself is only a small part of why it will adopt quickly or slowly. There's other things going on here. And it's the same with MedTech. And the goal of this methodology is to kind of get smart about what those other things are. So I'm going to offer 4 lenses very briefly that kind of set the stage for understanding why a market will adopt slowly or quickly. The first, of course, is we've got tough customers. They're highly educated, very opinionated. They are the answer people. We're talking about physicians usually. Sometimes there's other buyers, but classic example, physicians. The second problem is there's this landscape of demand. What's driving demand? Well, that's the denominator. It's usually a patient. We're going to use a classic example, some medical procedure on some patient prescribed by some physician. The third thing we got to understand is, okay, just how many are there? How big is the market really? How do we define that? And that's surprisingly tricky. And finally, you got to say, okay, you got all these moving parts. How do I tell my VCs what this is worth? How do I tell my strategics or the market, right? Or Wall Street? So I'm going to burn through those 4 quick lenses with a couple of illustrations. The first thing is those physicians, okay? The bottom line, you're coming out with a new technology. You have to get this educated, opinionated answer person to start doing something different than what they thought was the best thing they could do yesterday. They're not making bad, arbitrary decisions. This is how I take care of these patients. And you want me to do something different? Yeah, good luck, right? So what can we do about this? How can we think about this? Well, we'll pull in another classical framework. You've seen Rogers' technology innovation adoption curves before, early adopters, late majority, all that kind of stuff. This is how we understand how our body of decision makers are going to make these changes, the readiness and willingness to do something different tomorrow versus what they did yesterday, and it was working just fine. Now, the key, as we analyze it, so by the way, this whole methodology, we developed it inside of Medtronic. It's still used all across Medtronic. The key was that we did analytics on all the Medtronic products to figure out what drives adoption. We had this wealth of data internally. And the key is the early majority, right? There's some doctor at the university that will use your technology, even if it's got chicken wire and duct tape holding it together. There are innovators and some early adopters that will try anything because they want to help be part of the solution. But that's not market adoption. That's dabblers by innovators. So we got to get the early majority for 2 reasons. 1, they're a third of the market. And 2 is the latter half of the market. The late majority and laggards, they don't move unless they see the early majority moving, unless they see a swell of actual adoption going on. They're sitting in the back of the room at the auditorium when they're at their conferences, and some innovators up there saying, hey, try this new technology. And they're going, no way. You have not at all enough evidence. So the late majority and laggards don't move till everybody else is moving. So that 1/3 of the early majority gates, 85% of your market adoption. Now, what do these early majority doctors need? Well, if I were to ask you guys, if we were to do a survey, you already know what they need. We just quantified it and created a system around it. They need clinical evidence. They need to be paid fairly. They need to know who to use it on and when. They know how to use it, right? These are the things, but we can quantify that. So what we ended up coming up with is these 14 factors that could be a reason why a physician doesn't use your technology. They're not all relevant to all markets, but any one of these things, if you don't have it, could cause your adoption to be slow. So if you—
This is something that you discussed in the halls of Medtronic?
This is something, the first version we created inside of Medtronic, looking at these different kinds of factors. We then created a new set of factors when we created a consulting company and analyzed technologies to see. I didn't put the supporting analysis in this deck. This is just very quick. But basically, we did regression on these variables and scaled them and quantified them to say, okay, like some of this sounds a little generic, like condition management. Well, that's just like, when and where do these patients show up? Are they in front of a decision maker, or are they out in the wild? So how is this condition currently being treated? All right, there's some ways to describe that. But then, is it obvious when this technology should be used? The diagnostic clarity. Is there good clinical evidence? Are there guidelines and standards that tell the late majority, yes, you should be doing this? The reimbursement, all these things that are pretty intuitive if you think about it. On the technology side, do you have to put in a whole new lab to do it? Is it disruptive? Is it easy to use? Is it easy to train? Is there a high maintenance burden? Is it reliable? Again, not all of these things apply to every technology, but if it applies and you don't take care of it, the technology, a physician would say, yeah, it works great, but if I commit to this, I have to have this patient come back in every month for the next 10 years, and I don't have the staff to do that. And that would be a reason then for them to not use it. So the point of this is you would ask yourself these questions and try to identify the non-obvious reasons why someone might not use your technology, so then you can address that, right? The goal is to understand your S-shaped adoption curve and then influence it. So, that S-shaped adoption curve, speaking of, this is how this plays out. Once you start hitting that early majority, we start hitting that uptake, the classic hockey stick. I'm in Minnesota, right? Everybody wants a hockey stick. The hockey stick doesn't happen because you got a neat technology. It happens because you've got an effective technology that's easy to use, that they know who to use it on, that they get paid fairly for, that they can start using tomorrow. A lot of other things involved. And I'm going fast because there's a lot of stuff here and I'm living in time. So you just gotta, I can't see the Zoom people, so you gotta just speak up if you have a question. Okay, second point, that was the physicians. What do they need to decide to change their behavior? There's a whole world of science around that. Second thing is, what's going on with your target patients? Now, most people, especially in the beginning, kind of think of them as a group of target patients. But just like your technology, the more detailed understanding you have of your market landscape, the better you'll understand how it's going to respond. If you're trying to navigate through San Francisco Bay here, you would have trouble with the first map, but you could probably do okay on the last map there. So you need that granular approach. And then how do you think about these differences across your market? So we came up with this framework to prioritize subsegments of patients. And basically, it's based on how clear the benefit is that you're going to provide to that subsegment and where they are in the healthcare system. Can you reach them? Do they have a lot of complexity and comorbidity that makes it hard for them to benefit from the technology? And in the process of doing this, we coined this term, the perfect patient. And we really strive to encourage all the startup people in the world here to think about the perfect patient. And here's why. If you're going to go to that university physician, that innovator, or some early adopter and say, okay, it's ready and it's available and hey, it's even being reimbursed, why don't you try it? There's two possibilities at the extremes. You tell them, here's exactly what the perfect patient looks like. Go out and try it on 5 of them. And they carefully select perfect patients. They do it on 5. And guess what? They get the best possible outcome. You come back in and talk to them and they say, hey, I did it on the first 5 patients like you told me and it worked great. Then I did it on a 6th one and it didn't work. And the doctor says, but you know what? That's medicine. It doesn't always work exactly right. This is really cool. I like it. Now, the alternative of guiding that doctor to a perfect patient is, hey, doc, I got this new technology. Why don't you try it? And they decide the first 5 patients to try it on. Now, they're already doing what works to the best of their knowledge. So who do they try it on? The technical clinical term for the patients they try it on are called the train wrecks, where nothing else is working. And of course, your technology isn't going to work either. So you come back and say, yeah, we tried it on 5 and it only worked on 1. Your technology ain't ready. Sorry. And now they're burned. Now it's going to take 5 times as much energy to get them to come back and try again. So the focus on this perfect patient is essential for adoption. Okay. So how do we think about that? Well, here's just a simple version, right? We talk about that clinical value. We call it compellingness, clinical compellingness. And where are they in the healthcare system, right? Are they standing, if they're on the right side of the chart, they're standing in front of the decision maker with their symptoms. And if they're on the left side, they're sitting at home watching TV and they don't even know that they're at risk. So if there's a product with 3 subsegments here called technology A and technology B, 2 different products, I would say that these little ones over here are the perfect patient. They have high clinical value and they're somewhere closer at the decision maker. So someone could decide to treat them tomorrow. Now you look at technology B, and that's it's even a bigger market, looks like, than technology A, but the adoption is going to be so slow in technology B because most of the patients are in that lower left quadrant where the compellingness is not as obvious, and maybe they're 2 or 3 steps away from the decision maker. They're in the referral chain, they're at the general practice, they're not even coming in because your technology is a screening technology. And how do you get the public to come in and get screened? Well, they're way off to the left here. So there's a lot of variables like this that are essential to understand in order to predict the S-shaped adoption curve. So I threw an example in here. Any questions, comments? I think it's all really intuitive. It's just thinking about it systematically.
I'm not completely following your axes here, Ross.
Okay, so the vertical axis is just the value that the technology provides. And what we used to say is at 100%, you are saving pediatric lives. You can't get more value than life-saving pediatric therapies.
Okay.
And at the bottom end of the vertical axis is a slightly improved foot powder, right? It's like, okay, yeah, it's a little better, but who cares? And good luck. And somewhere in the middle is, okay, time savings or slightly fewer comorbidities and so on. So and then the horizontal one is kind of where they're at in the healthcare system. Again, if you're on the left side, you're sitting on the couch, you don't even know you have a problem. And on the right side, that patient that you're targeting is already being taken care of, is already in front of the right decision maker. And when you bring this technology to the decision maker, that doctor can say, oh, yeah, I can think of 3 patients I just saw last week that could use this.
I see. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Joe, to bring it back, Ross, this has been fantastic. To bring it back to your S curves, your technology B is like the dishwasher, because the dishwasher, you are washing the dishes with your hands, and that seems to work fine. And it doesn't really say, whereas your microwave is giving you time that you can't replicate. And so that's more your technology A. And that explains why your inflection point has changed.
Yep, you're getting it. Yep.
I don't like to use it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's still a modest value proposition.
I don't like having to figure out how to get all those dishes to fit. And then they may or may not be completely dry. And then you have to take them out and stack them up. I just do the dishes.
And what you're actually talking about is some of these things here too, where things that you wouldn't think about. Is it a burden? Is it easy to use? Do you have to maintain it? That's the dishwasher problem too, is yeah, it washes the dishes, but there's then all these other characteristics that weren't initially obvious.
Yeah.
Just like you described, Joe, that say, yeah, I tried it. Don't really like it.
And in the early days, you didn't have, like now when you move into a house, there's a spot. And every dishwasher is exactly the same size, and it slides into that hole underneath your counter. In the early days, you had to find a new place for this big old box.
That's the operational disruption right there, right?
Yeah.
If you get nuclear resonance imaging, right, you got to put in a freaking lead-lined room.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Well, the other thing I'll give.
Say that standards help you a lot too. That's where competitors all get together and agree on a standard way of doing things, which also helps the whole market in general. Sorry.
Standards and guidelines, you got it. Critical to get the broad market to agree to change. Excellent.
That's how I got into standards, because of Medtronics. My boss said Medtronics is doing weird things. Go in there and fix it.
I should have asked if anybody's worked with Medtronic and heard of PAA. It really is out there all, and because people have trained and left and they do it at their other companies. And so I've even seen job descriptions out publicly posted that said desired training in PAA experience. All right. So yeah, there's a real world example here. Back in 2004, the ICD market, the implantable cardio defibrillator market, right? The industry did all these big clinical studies, Scud, Heft, and I'm spacing out on the other markets, started with a P, clinical trials. So they did all these clinical trials, got the expanded indications from the FDA, huge populations become indicated for ICDs. The industry forecast 15% growth per year for the foreseeable future. We applied these methodologies and drew this curve, showed it to Medtronic management, and they kicked us out of the room and said, yeah, you guys, nice analytics, but you don't know what you're talking about. We know this market. This is what actually happened. Okay. The patients came on board, and all we did in the simplest terms, it was like that last chart with the bubbles. There was a group of patients driving from M1, milestone 1 to milestone 2 there that were incredibly compelling, about half of the patients. And then the other half of the patients were not compelling. They were older, they were frail, they had comorbidities, they had complications. Their disease wasn't as severe. And so the adoption of the first half was fast, and the adoption of the second half was very slow. And that's basically all we did. There was a lot more, and we said, look at, when you're done with the first half, this growth is going to slow down. It was that easy, and it was real. Okay, point 3, how am I doing on time? Oh, I'm doing all right. Point 3, you got to quantify this. And so for that, we use the epidemiologist's bathtub, right? There's an incidence rate of people getting your condition or your indication or whatever it is. There's a prevalence pool of all the people living in your market today. We'll call it the US, and they're alive today. So let's use diabetes or something, right? There's an annual incidence of type 1 diabetes. There's a prevalence pool of people living with diabetes, and some of them die. And that is the balanced epidemiology system for that patient group right now. What's interesting about this is it varies radically by how long you live, right? So duration is the time that you meet the criteria for your device to be used, or time living with a condition. So type 1 diabetes, there's a small incidence rate, like 20,000 a year, new type 1 diabetes incidence, and 1 million people living with type 1 diabetes because they lived for 50 years. It's chronically managed now. It used to be a death sentence. The common cold, just an extreme example, right? Maybe 1 or 2 of us have a common cold right now. We've probably all had a cold in the last year. So it's an incidence-driven dynamic. And at any given time, there's very few people that actually have a cold. So these are very different dynamics, and it hugely impacts how you quantify the market opportunity. So here's a picture. There's some disease here, right? And it's got an annual incidence, and over decades, maybe the population is growing, the incidence rate's going up a little bit, whatever it is. Let's call it type 1 diabetes. If you brought a new technology to treat type 1 diabetes, what is the most successful adoption curve you could draw? And would you put it in your business plan? Well, it looks like this. Now, who would put this in your business plan? Who would come to a VC and say, yeah, I'm going to make $1 billion in the first year or 2, and then 100 million after that? Forget it. No one would say that. But why is this the best possible adoption curve? If you think about type 1 diabetes, if you come up with a magic wand that gets approved by the FDA that cures type 1 diabetes, and it only costs $1,000, and you start selling this type 1 diabetes therapy magic wand, who gets treated the first year? The entire prevalence pool, if your operations and logistics can support that demand. So in the first year, you treat the prevalence pool, you cure them all. In the second year, you've got 20,000 incidents of new onset type 1 diabetes. Now, no one has ever drawn this chart, but the interesting thing is it has happened. Now, the reason it's usually not this extreme is because operational logistics and frictions don't allow the magic wand to get produced and sent out, 1 million. There are a lot of reasons. But in certain cases, and one of the cases that doctors have often brought up with me was the ablation of Wolff-Parkinson's White, WPW. It was very easy to diagnose on the electrocardiogram. It was young people. It was killing them. It was easy to treat with the ablation, and it was easy to know that it worked because you see the ECG go from one form to the other form because you ablated the Wolff-Parkinson's White reentrant circuit. Wolff-Parkinson's White volumes spiked for several years in the 60s, I think it was, 70s, and then dropped down. And people were like, wow, what? Wolff-Parkinson's White doesn't happen anymore? Did the disease change? No. You treated the prevalence, and we're returning to the incidence rate. So it has happened. Okay. So you take the patient, the physician behavior change, the patient stratification, and the quantification of the market using incidence and prevalence, and you put these things together. This is the final point here, is you have some market opportunity, some vague market opportunity. First of all, you quantify that with incidence and prevalence, and you get the numbers solid. Then you stratify it using the different characteristics of your subsegment patients, how compelling and accessible they are. And then you think about your physicians and who's likely to adopt and who's not, and when will they adopt and what do they need. And this is your market opportunity. You've now got your map of how the market's going to respond. Now, this is, unfortunately, the saddest slide I've ever made. Because the reality is, when you launch your new technology, you might be looking at 5% of your market. Those early adoptive physicians on the obvious patients. And even if you do well and get the early majority on board, you might only be treating those more obvious patients. The big black area of less compelling patients and less adoptive physicians is the bad news that we all have to deal with, all the reality. And it's why this S-shaped adoption curve that I drive is not properly scaled. The space between milestone 2 and milestone 3 is usually much bigger on both the vertical and horizontal axis. And so this is the reality that we've learned about MedTech adoption. I'm going to take, I'm going to go one more step then. Any questions or comments so far? I'm going to put a revenue number on it. Okay, great. You're out there, you got type 1 diabetes or heart failure or atrial fibrillation or whatever it is you're working on. You got some incidence numbers, you got some prevalence numbers, yay. How do you tell Wall Street what this is worth? Do you base it on the incidence? Do you base it on the prevalence? We saw that huge spike curve. What do you do with that? Okay, well, let's say we got $1,000 magic wand. Okay, or actually, no, I think I used insulin pumps. So in this example, so revenue comes from 3 kinds of generic buckets. You do something the first time on the patient, so the de novo interaction. Okay, so that is driven when you think about how to model, that's driven by the incidence rate. Now you might have upgrades, you might have replacements, you might do it again, you might come back in. So there's maybe in your technology a repeat cycle, or maybe there's a disposable or service component or ongoing thing. This is it. This is the 3 forms of revenue you can get from any medical device. So if we take the insulin pump for type 1 diabetes, I'm not going to go through the numbers, but you put some prices on it, you put some, things, and you've got 1 million people with type 1 diabetes and 20,000 incidents. But we'll take 25% off and say we can't treat them, they're too complex, they're not right. So we net out some people, and we got 750,000. And we're going to treat the incidence rate. We're going to replace the pumps every 5 years. We're going to sell insulin into those pumps every year at $2,000 a year. The incidence patient is only driving 75 million in purple there. The replacements is driving 675 million a year when the market is fully treated and adopted. This is an end state revenue. Okay? If you've penetrated the whole market, then the replacements is worth 675. And then if you've penetrated the whole market, the entire prevalence is giving you $1.5 billion of insulin a year. So all of the money's in the insulin. So now we've put a number on it. The full market adoption at milestone 3, the top of the S-curve, is worth $2.2 billion per year. It's an annual number. It's not some arbitrary big thing. What happens, though? The first critique that people will say about this is, wait a minute. You told me the de novo is only treating the incidence, and these are replacement devices in blue on the prevalence pool. But I treated the prevalence pool once with de novo, right? That's another 750 times 5,000, okay? So that's $3.75 billion of de novo treatment of the prevalence pool, and it's not even in my calculation. I'm ignoring $3.75 billion of revenue. And so people get all upset about this. But the problem is time. Where is that 3.75 billion? You can see it in the chart there. The de novo pumps are being done. Some replacements start to come over time. And then the disposable insulin is the big revenue that grows as people start using the pump. All of the 3.75 billion is spread out as it takes time to treat that population. You never really see that 3.75 billion in any obvious way. It's in there, but it's really not that important. And yet it's how many people measure their market, is prevalence times ASP. And it's oftentimes completely wrong to think that way.
Do you think this is great, and I appreciate this. Do you think that this type of thinking is better shared with the device company leadership, with potential investors, or at a value analysis committee?
I would say the first. It has to be company leadership first. They have to know this information so they can be accurate in what they tell their investors or the market or Wall Street or something. Now, I don't mind. I have had clients in the past know this information and choose not to necessarily present their market this way, because it's a harsh reality oftentimes. And they get to tell Wall Street whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the next slide, I'm basically done now. But the next slide, I added this some years ago, 2017. This BPH company was acquired for an outrageous amount of money. I don't usually reveal the name. Not that it's a big deal, but this is their slide. This is their slide in their pitch deck. And it talks about a market size of $30 billion. Anybody got any single technology generating $30 billion a year? That's Medtronic's revenue, total. It is the most egregious, and this happened all the time. I saw this in so many companies. So it cracks me up. They're talking about revenue in 2015 and 16 of 50 million and 100 million. Oh, by the way, though, buy us because we've got a $30 billion market opportunity. Insane. These are not dumb people. They're backed by Wilson Sonsini and all these big West Coast investors. So, yeah, I'd start with the executives, then I'd talk to the investors. Some investors know this. That's what we do. That's what we did. Thanks for letting me share it. Questions?
Are you presently teaching as an adjunct somewhere?
I do. I lecture every semester at a University of Minnesota, Carlson School of Management, medical industry class. I occasionally lecture down at Duke or a couple other local places. It just depends on what they're teaching and if they want me to come in.
I see you as a delightful lecturer.
I have fun with it. It's provocative concepts.
Dr.
So my challenge to the group is, am I smoking something? Does this sound right?
That's not very much of a challenge. Tiger?
Very right. It sounds like you're looking at all of the users of the device and what the impediments are, in setup and in sales and all of the other aspects or the other parts of the product lifecycle. And it's often ignored because founders like to focus on the clinical use. A quick story, which I think falls into this, I was working on re-sterilizable internal electrodes. And we went to a hospital and we went to talk to the re-sterilization group and they said, oh yeah, you can, the hospital will buy it, but no doctors will ever use it because it's too hard to re-sterilize. And so it gets shut down due to something that is not at all related to clinical efficacy because it makes somebody's life harder in the value chain.
Correct. I've got a dozen stories like that. Yeah. Oh, there's some people with hands raised.
Yes, they are. I insist that Tiger Buford be the next person to speak.
Thanks, Ross. Really interesting, and it's reality is painful for med device companies. So, while you're thinking, your examples were mostly physical medical devices. Do these adoption curves change when you start talking about data products like SaaS businesses?
I think a lot of the core concepts apply. I'm in a SaaS business right now, and I can look at many of these same lenses to understand who's an early adopter or a late adopter of a new SaaS technology, who's going to get more value or less value from my particular SaaS technology. How many possible companies really are there? How do I quantify the incidence and prevalence of companies that would buy my SaaS product? So, in fact, yes, we've had fun with these concepts, structured differently. And I don't have details around them, but the broad concepts, we've done them a little bit in like retail and automotive, and just to have some fun with it because the core concepts can absolutely be applied, and you will learn things about your market by asking the same questions.
Interesting. Thank you.
Goldie?
Yeah, thank you, Ross. It's just realistic. I think what you said, every word resonates. I sit on both sides of the table. I now sit on a board of medical startups, and I think how they calculate prevalence is within a country, there's so much variation. And the slide that you had about the patient itself, like what you think that number is that gathered from several ways, but what that actually fits in your technology domain, it's so different. So appreciate that slide very much. I think how companies actually go about calculating market size, it's flawed. So
It is.
I am so happy to see your presentation. It will help me tremendously when I have seen dozens of pitch decks and I kind of roll my eyes and say, how actually this number make any sense, right?
Ross, be sure to
And
share the deck with us in the our weekly call
yeah,
section.
excellent
Yeah, I will
presentation.
get it to you, Joe, and you can do what you want with it.
Yeah, I appreciate it very much, Ross. Thank you so much. I think it will help me a great deal.
Great. And Goldie, actually, you touched on something that I didn't highlight, but it can be essential. When you think about that incidence and prevalence and stratifying it and who's really going to be a good target, there's a process of what we call gross to net, right? Yeah, there's a bunch of people that have heart failure, but really only 21% of them are a candidate for this procedure. And even those are not good. It's only 3% that are good candidates. So sometimes that gross to net reduction of actual patients who could benefit is a huge difference.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's on the patient side. You're absolutely right. But on a technology like infrastructure or real estate, that's another. I had a company where they had this new gas tanks. They wanted to sell because whatever it's sold to hospital, they were indicated for something different, so they couldn't use nitrous oxide. They did not think about the size of the tank fitting in ICU. Right? So forget about the real estate of your product that will require in the environment that you're thinking about. Doctors will just not say anything because that's who you're talking to. But the people who acquire technology, they say, no, we don't allow this in the room. And they were surprised by it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So yeah, I think you touched on main three topics. Those are the critical ones. And you cannot just not talk to the right people. Either it is a technology space, who as a patient, and then clinicians who is a decision maker, right?
Yeah. And
thank you.
Kind of related to Tiger's point, we've done incidence and prevalence on hospital rooms, how many and how often are they refreshed, or when we were looking at AEDs, automatic external defibrillators, right? We did incidence and prevalence of feet of airport concourse, right? If you need an AED every 300 feet, how many 300-foot segments of airport concourse were there, right? So yeah, you can incidence and prevalence those rooms and things like that. Yeah.
Mark Matthews suggests that you write a book about this.
We were planning on doing that, and we just never got around to it. It's sad. Thank you, though, Mark. It's a great idea.
Marvin Barron has something to say.
I do. Hey, Ross. So how does this intersect when you enter into a dynamic where consumer demand is not just a function of kind of clinical standards of care? So in STI diagnostics, we've got this really weird thing happening where there's some STIs like cold sores, HSV1, where the standard of care is don't diagnose, yet demand is exploding for them against physician recommendations. And then in other cases like HIV screening, you're seeing demand for diagnostics fall off the cliff, even though the rate of HIV is going up dramatically. So it's starting to look like in this space, it's moving opposite what you would expect from clinical recommendations. And some people are just demanding it as part of like preventative healthcare, not as screening and not diagnostics. Things like that, when you're entering into consumer trends, start to make this tricky.
Okay. Marvin, you just opened up a whole can of worms. And it's a great point and a great question. And we ended up having, I didn't touch it on here. I was talking about marketing to doctors to make clinical diagnostic decisions. There's a whole nother set of we came up with 3 other factors when it was kind of like retail consumer driven medical. So if you wanted to do liposuction or fat reduction or Botox for your lips and things like this, none of this stuff mattered. All of a sudden, it's a completely different set of parameters. It's the ability to pay, it's vanity type things and other stuff. And so we had to come up with some very additional different metrics to understand the non-prescription medical world, like those vanity procedures and things like that. I will, if you're interested, I'll dig up what a couple of those parameters were and get that to you.
Would be very interested. Thank you.
You bet, Marvin.
Bijan Lachi, how are you today? You are on mute, so we'll never know.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Good morning or good afternoon. Yeah. Thank you. I'm well. Yeah, sorry, I don't get to attend on Fridays. Usually have meetings at this same time. So
I mean, where do you live now?
I live in Florida.
I thought so. Yeah. Okay. We're in Florida.
Sarasota.
Okay. How many of you on the call are being pummeled with bad weather today?
Well, we have cloudy and rainy weather. It's not too bad.
Yeah, they say it's going to be below zero in many parts of the US this weekend. So, brr.
It's 4 degrees in Minneapolis.
Do you have snowfall yet?
It's coming in this afternoon, 3 to 6 inches between now and tomorrow and morning or something.
Don't you guys call that shorts weather, Ross?
Yeah, this is not a big deal for us. Yeah, it's Chicago's complaining and other things, but 3 to 6 inches and above zero, I didn't even pay attention.
Nicholas, you have something to add?
I wanted to say hi to Ross.
I just wanted to give Joe a plug from his website, and also Ross kudos, because this book, I don't know, can you see? I don't know if you can see it. Yes. Oh no, I can't see it.
Put it in front of your face.
Oh yeah, I have that book in my house.
And
it was required reading for my class.
Ross is just as passionate as Michael is when I watch his old 1980s videos about it. So I got a lot out of it. Also, I was curious about the dynamic with the populations changing, how that's going to impact things. We're at 10,000 people turning over 65 in the US alone every day, and that'll double in about 10 years or so.
Yeah, that's absolutely a factor. It turns out to be usually a slow factor on the forecasting. When you run a 20-year forecast, like the chart we're looking at here now or something. So, I mean, you can even see in the bottom chart, the prevalence population is increasing. Maybe they're surviving more. There's a survival benefit and things like that. So yeah, there are absolutely population trends and disease rate trends. AIDS came out of nowhere, and modeling that, we did work on that, was really interesting. But generally we found the increasing elderly and the increasing populations and things like that had a relatively measured impact. It didn't change rapidly. It just changed over time. It was surprisingly not as big a factor as some people had thought it would be.
Well, thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas.
If I'm not mistaken, next week we're going to talk about a new technology that's coming to market. Escapes me at the moment what it is, but I always appreciate those because we have a lot of functional views from folks about, did you think of this and did you think of that, which is a lot like what Elizabeth wrote me privately at the end of the month. Why don't you tell us about this forum that you are part of?
Thank you. I work with Life Science Washington, and I asked Joe if he would come and chat with our mentors and, mentee companies. So we've got early stage life sciences companies. And if you're physically located in Seattle and could join us on January 30th to offer your advice, just to chat with these companies, we'd be delighted to have it. And I can put a link in the chat here.
Baron, you're coming, right?
Maren is on a
No,
she's going to be on a cruise.
Not Maren, Baron, Marvin.
Oh, sorry, Baron.
Well, I'm not in Seattle. I am one of the mentee companies because our tech's coming out of Washington State.
Right, you're in Philly.
In the WIN program, and so real plug to the whole program and the organization. It's been up there with Joe Haig's group at connecting me with people I need to talk about or talk with.
Well,
I wish I wasn't 3 hours south.
Speaking of connection, our in-person meeting is May 1st and 2nd, and I'll announce here for the first time, I think this will be my last one. I've been doing this on my own for a decade. And I think I need a new challenge. So I may find someone who's suitable to carry the torch. But at a minimum, in terms of me figuring out how much orange juice you guys are going to drink, I've done that for a decade now. I think it's time to retire that. So if, like Elizabeth, you've never had a chance to come and you've wanted to, this may be my last time to get my best friends together, so you can at least make those connections. And if you're a Boorques and this will be your 5th or 6th time, it's a good chance to get in a last personal hug with everybody. So if you can make it, I'd love to include you. It's in Newport Beach. The closest airport is SNA, the John Wayne Airport. And you all, almost without exception, I think, have access to premium. Ping me and let me know your plans. Okay. So
can I do my one?
Well, who's speaking?
I'm sorry. Jan here. I had one practical thing for everybody to know about in their packaging. California is passing a law about chasing triangles on any of your packaging. If you don't have the right materials, you will not be allowed to sell your product in California.
If you're not part of the packaging channel in our workspace, you can join that. And Jan contributed quite a bit about that this week. And who else? A man spoke.
And Joe, when's your next event again? I'm sorry, Newport. I didn't catch the
May 1 and 2.
Thank you.
What hotel, Joe?
It's at the Newport Beach Hyatt.
Okay.
And we have fan favorites returning. Anthony Chang, his AI talks become more and more important each year. Mauricio is coming back. Dave Albert's coming back. We have someone that I met through Tiger, Mark Viscogliosi, who is the head of the Viscogliosi brothers and the founder of MCRA, a major private capitalist who runs hundreds of millions of dollars talking about raising funds. Omar Khatib will be there this year, and perhaps some of you. So catch up with me and we'll talk about all that. And Margaret, you and I are going to talk after this call.
Absolutely.
Let's give it up for Ross. That was a great presentation today, friend.
Nice job.
Thank you all. I enjoyed sharing it.
As soon as I moved the pawn, I realized the mistake I made. So have at it. I haven't looked this morning.
I don't get very many mistakes from you, so I appreciate it when you give me a chance.
Yeah, I've been on a string lately. Do you see how low my score has gotten?
No, I wasn't watching.
Oh my, it's terrible. I'm in the 12s again.
Ooh,
I've been playing this guy who's living in Nigeria, who's a Russian, and his score in the 12s, and he's been beating me all these times. I have issues.
Marvin's getting to be a pain too, so I'm
know.
not appreciative. I used to enjoy. Yeah.
Anyhow, for Joe Hage and Joe Hage Enterprises, this has been Joe Hage, and I'm glad to see you all, and I hope to see you in person for the hugs you all deserve.
Yeah.
See you soon. Bye.
Yes.